Haven't you seen this one? Good, yeah. I was a little nervous about her daughter not sitting right next to her this week. Yeah.
Hey.
You get all situated?
What's that? I didn't hear.
What is happening fast?
Seriously. All right, we're live.
I did an announcement for you this morning. I forgot to give it to you. Chris heard it, I bet.
Yep.
Hey, Chris.
Good down here.
Good, just the four of us.
Is this gonna be recorded, or are you gonna actually stream it
Stream
to?
the,
It's streaming to Facebook and it's gonna go up on YouTube.
Which page?
just the Three Stones Church page, right? That's where you. Yeah, I was going to say, if you needed to. Was she able to get a book?
No, because the person I was supposed to get her the book didn't order it. So I just did. She'll get it Wednesday, and I'll keep it up to date between now and then.
Here's
Yeah.
screenshots, maybe.
Yeah.
Well, hey, everybody.
Hello?
I have a couple extra copies of the book. Does anyone need? You going to share, or you want copies?
I'm gonna share.
Okay, very good. Well, thanks for coming, and thanks for being interested in growing in ourselves this act of discipleship. Again, as we've talked the last two Sunday mornings, it's undoubtedly what we're supposed to be involved in, and then I do think it's not just here, but in many churches, most churches probably, it's the great whole of the church, where we just don't focus on that which is most important, and also that which is really not that complicated. I think we overcomplicate it, and then we get worried about it because of that. Chuck Lawless, who wrote this book, I saw him speak in North Carolina year before last, and it was a conference on missions. And even though this isn't on missions, what he said then has always stuck with me. His session was about praying for missions. And he opened with, we don't pray enough for missions because we don't pray enough. And that always stuck with me, the simplicity of that and the absolute truth of it. And I think it's a very similar thing when it comes to our prayer for the Great Commission and our living out the Great Commission, that we don't focus on it as we should. And so hopefully this will help us as individuals, and then individuals will help us as a church. So let's open with prayer. Lord God, I thank you for those gathered here in this building, those who are gathered online to watch this. Lord God, we just ask that you would indeed grow in us a hunger and the joy and the privilege of you using us to disciple others. Lord, may we put aside any fears, any anxieties, anything that would just hold us back, because we know this is what you're calling us to do, and we know that you enable us to do whatever it is that you call us to do. So Lord, we just ask, as we look at your word and as we look at this book that Chuck Lawless has written for us, that you would use those things to shape us more, to look like Jesus, that we would more closely follow him and help others to follow him. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
So this book, and if you don't know if you had a chance to look through it or not, is basically kind of a day-to-day handbook for this process. And it's not everything there is to know, it's not everything that there is to do, but it is a really nice jumpstart for just kind of changing our own attitudes and our own lifestyles toward being people who would want to make disciples. And it has 3 sections, 2 long ones and 2 shorter ones, 2 6-day sessions and 1 2-day section. And the first section is about being amazed, and it's re-amazing us at Jesus, having us be amazed again, anew, maybe for the first time for some of us at who Jesus is and what he does. Then the second section is about being a nobody, and that's kind of just putting ourselves in the correct place in relationship to Jesus, in relationship to discipleship. And then the last 2 days are on doing something. And if you haven't looked all the way through it, I would calm any fears right now. This book is not going to send us to go knock on a stranger's door to share the gospel. There may be a day coming when you might want to do that, but this is more about things that you do for yourself, reading some things, maybe writing a couple of letters, which I found extraordinarily helpful, and those kind of things. So you may choose to do that, but this isn't anything that's going to stretch us too far, but I think it will put us steps in the right direction. In the introduction on page 1, he says, I'm a professor of evangelism and missions in a time when evangelicals aren't doing much evangelism. In my own denomination, we're reporting fewer baptisms than we did 5 decades ago. I teach missions in a time when 1.7 billion people still have little or no access to the gospel. We have resources like seldom before, but still the church is failing to do the work of the Great Commission. Something must change. So he does something here, whether on purpose or by accident, that I really like. The introduction starts on page 1. Do you ever notice in a lot of books, the introduction starts on like small Roman numeral I?
Yes.
And I think because of that, people skip the introductions.
Right.
And most good, solid Christian books, the introductions are really, really worth reading. And I would encourage you to read the introductions to books. But I think here, by doing that, it kind of does encourage us to read through that. So I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I would encourage you to read through the introduction, maybe tonight, and then start day 1 tomorrow. And so the plan for this group meeting will be for us to, starting tomorrow, do day 1. And then next Sunday, we'll get together and review the first week and do kind of a midpoint check, and then look a little bit at what the second section will look like. And then 2 weeks from today, Lord willing, we'll gather again and kind of just see how we did and see how it might have affected us and see if there's something as individuals or as a group or as a church we might want to do next. This is different for an Advent study, but I do think that Jesus came in part so that we would go, right? Part of the Great Commission is to go and to make disciples. And so, I think this is an appropriate thing to study during Advent. And I also, and Ed and I have talked about this, we've talked about it with the elders, I feel a great urgency to focus on discipleship at Three Stones Church. I really do. It's part of what we say is important to us, right? In the Three Stones, worship, evangelism, and discipleship. But I feel like we need to, I don't know what the proper metaphor is, step on the gas, lay a foundation. I don't know what the best way to put it. I think we need to focus more on that basic thing. During this pandemic, we have been limited from a lot of things, but I don't think that we've been exempted from our work in the Great Commission. So what's it going to look like in January and February and March? Are we still going to be, masked up coming to church? Are we still going to be limited in our gatherings? Maybe. I want to be ready, whether we are or aren't, to further the work of discipleship in this church. And so I really appreciate all of y'all being here. Any general thoughts or ideas or questions or comments before we move on?
So 2 things from an admin standpoint.
Sir.
For those that are online that may not have access to the book, where can they get a book if they want one? And the second thing is, since we're doing this kind of through Facebook Live, if they have questions, they can post to the Facebook site as the video is going on, and I'll monitor that, and we can at least that way have communication. I can read their questions. There may be a few second delay, but I can read their questions and then you can respond.
Sure, absolutely. So, and then for those online, I'm not sure how the volume is picking up here, but Ed had asked about getting a book if you don't have one. I have a couple of extra books. You can text, call, or email me, and if you're local and it's easy to do, or you can order one from Amazon. And if you order it today, you probably have it by Tuesday. But if you're, I do have 3 or 4 books, and be very happy to get it into your hands within the next day or two. As soon as you let me know, I'll work to get the book in your hands. And then if you have,
it's less than $10.
Yeah, right. It's less than $10. If you and if you have any questions and you're watching online, you can type those in, and Ed's going to monitor that feed, and we'll share the questions here as well. So with that being said, the beginning of this, the whole first 6 days is being amazed at Jesus. And the Great Commission step for the first day, so if you have your book and you look, you have on page 7 is day 1. Day 1 starts, and you'll see there's the title for the day, and then there's a text for the day, a scripture text. This is the longest one in the book. They're mostly much shorter than this. And then there's some, on page 12 would be the end of day 1. There's some reflection questions, and then there's a Great Commission action step. And I'm going to tell you, the one for day 1 was an extraordinary exercise the first time I did it. It's to send an email or a letter to 2 friends telling them how amazing Christ has been in your life. And it's to help us get into practice of speaking good words about Christ. So the first time I read it, and I was doing a group online, and I thought, yeah, right, just going to write somebody a note about Jesus. And I started writing, and it became very emotional and long. So I had to go back and edit it because I was certain that no one wanted to read a 30-page email. But it was a great experience to reflect on what Christ has done in my own life, and it was just extraordinarily helpful for me, especially after reading through the text that he gives us. So what I'd like to do tonight to kind of kick this off is to look at these 3 passages in Mark. He gives us one passage starting with Mark 4:35, but 3 stories. I'd like to look at those. And the great thing about Mark, and we've talked about this before, so you may remember this, that the 4 Gospels were all written to us. They're all written for the church eternally until Christ comes back. The whole Bible is, the 4 Gospels has an audience. But the initial audience, the 4 Gospel accounts had 4 different audiences. So Matthew, which starts with the genealogy to Christ, it goes back to Abraham and comes forth. Matthew was written to the Jews, to whom the genealogy was super important, right? So he goes, had to come from the line of Abraham, had to come from the line of David, and Matthew goes, okay, here you go, boom, 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 boom. The really interesting thing about the genealogy in Matthew is that, typical Jewish genealogies, you started with one man to another man to another man to another man to another man. There's women listed in that genealogy. You also didn't necessarily list every single generation. So if you get down to your great-great-great-grandpa was a horse thief, you might skip over him. Not here. They got everybody. So and then when he lists, he lists Rahab, who not only wasn't Jewish, and she was a woman, and she was a prostitute. So everybody else would have left that out. So this is some of the reality and truth that we get from the Gospels. Or when we get down to, David, it talks about his affair with Bathsheba. I mean, it just lays everything out very plainly. And then Luke was written to probably a Greek reader. So Luke is that very logical, everything is laid out logically. It's not purely chronological. When you read through Luke, he places things sometimes together because of circumstances or things that come to similar conclusions. Luke lays them out that way because of who was reading it. So if you think about the philosophers during that time, Luke was writing to people with that sort of mindset. John is written to largely to new believers. And so John talks a lot about the love of God, the love of Christ, who Jesus is. And John also does not cover the birth narrative, only in Matthew and Luke. Because Matthew is very important, and Luke's just very complete. Mark is the shortest of the gospel accounts, and Mark was written to a Roman audience. And if you think of Rome during that time, you think of the games, the gladiators, those kind of things, very active culture. And so if you have headlines in your Bible, you get this, very short. We go from John the Baptist preparing the way to Jesus being baptized, to Jesus being tempted, to beginning his ministry, calling his disciples, and then it's just he heals somebody, he preaches, he heals somebody else, and it's action after action after action of Christ. There's more verbs squished in Mark per sentence than in any of the other Gospels, and so Mark is a great place to read if you're going to read with a new believer, and Mark's just another great place, I think, to read as Chuck Lawless is starting us with, just to re-engage at being amazed with Jesus. So in Mark 4, verse 35, we have the beginning of the story of Jesus calming the storm. And on that day, when evening had come, he said to them, "Let us go across to the other side." And leaving the crowd, they took him with them in the boat, just as he was. And other boats were with him. And a great windstorm arose, and the waves were breaking into the boat, so that the boat was already filling. But he was in the stern, asleep on the cushion. And they woke him and said to him, "Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?" And he awoke and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, "Peace, be still." And the wind ceased, and there was great calm. He said to them, "Why are you so afraid? Have you still no faith?" And they were filled with great fear and said to one another, "Who is this then, that even the wind and the sea obey him?" So when you hear that brief little passage there, you speak about being amazed at Jesus. It's an amazing passage. And what out of this passage, just little things, do you find amazing?
think for me, the first thing that stuck out was just how their response to Jesus calming the storm.
Yeah, freaked him out.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Because if you'd been in this boat, the boat was filling with water, right? So, you know, this isn't a little, it's not just a little rough, right? A little windy, a little rough. This is bad. And Jeff Townsend was telling me, and Ken both have been in the Holy Land, and they said that there's a situation in the Sea of Galilee, the way it's situated in the mountains, that these storms come, it's like you're in the middle of the ocean. You know, the way they come down out of the mountain, the winds come down out of the mountains, and it's just crazy. So yeah, their response, that Jesus was sleeping, right? I mean, if you were in a boat, which probably, if it was a big boat for that time, might have been like from here to the AV booth, probably not that long. And so you're in the midst of this huge storm, the boat's rocking, you know, being pitched, rolled, right, filled with water, and Jesus is just at peace and asleep. I also find amazing Mark's wording on what Jesus did to the storm. He rebuked it. I don't know what that looked like. I don't know what words he used, or if he used words, but he rebuked the storm, almost like it was an affront to him that he had to do this, and he stopped it. And then, and I heard Matthew Chandler preach about this, and he has a way with words that I can't imitate, but you tell a kid to stop doing something, and then they do it 2 or 3 more times before they stop. Or you tell them to be quiet, and they got to get 1 or 2 more things out, right, before they're quiet. He said, not so when Jesus tells the wind and the waves to stop. They stop. There wasn't one more wisecracking crack of thunder, you know, not the ocean or not the sea throwing one more wave over the boat, like before it calms down, like it was just immediately still. And I know we all believe this, but I think it helps to remember this is a true story. Like, this really happened. There were real guys on the boat with Jesus. There was a real storm, a really bad storm. Jesus was really asleep, and Jesus stood up and made the storm stop. I think it's good to pause just for a minute there and say, yeah, that really happened. And I've never seen anything like that at all. I saw a televangelist walk down on the beach in Virginia Beach and tell a hurricane to stay away, and the hurricane did not listen to him. He put his hands up and he told the storm to go away, and it came right on shore. But when Jesus said stop, it stopped. You know, I prayed for rain, and I prayed for rain to stop. You know, I prayed for storms, tornadoes not to come through where we live. You know, all those kind of things, and I believe that those prayers are answered in some sort of way, but not like this, right? And so I think it is amazing, and I think it's helpful sometimes to sit down and just, especially as we're going through this book and trying to get into the mindset that the author is trying to bring us to, about being amazed, that we take this time and go, yeah, this really happened. This really happened. A real man stood up in a real boat in the middle of a real storm and said, stop it. And the storm did.
The disciples sometimes make me feel better, because I always think when I read this that they were there. They did see him perform miracles, and they still were afraid, and they still had doubts. And I think I'm just amazed at his patience with the disciples, and how he just asked these simple questions, like, to them. And I mean, we do the same thing, maybe not with a literal storm, and they had him in the boat. We have him living inside of us.
Right?
And
Right.
it's that moment, if that's what it is faith. It's, do you believe I am who I said I am? And if you do, then why are you afraid?
And you know, I think that I get such encouragement from Peter, because the very first time they met, Peter was blown away. Like, away from me, I'm the sinful man. Like, I know who you are. And then Peter was in here, right? Peter's in the boat here too. Well, I'm scared. You know, I mean, Peter kept like going, his faith kind of, but a little more each time is the thing.
And it's the pattern. They call out to him, and he answers, and he gives them peace.
Right.
He calms the storm, and however he's going to calm it, he may not. He calms them, you know, and he just gently reminds us of his power. And I just love that they then, you know, it just showed that these storms are an opportunity for him. That it just shows me that it's an opportunity for me to run to him so that he can give me what he wants. And then, you know, they saw him and they were filled with great fear, you know, the reverent fear. It makes you appreciate the storm, because if we didn't have them,
We wouldn't know.
we wouldn't, yeah.
Yeah. So let's let this run out just for a minute. Let's let this one play for a minute. What would happen had they not awakened Jesus? Jesus was with them. Jesus was not going to die this day, right? Jesus' death was a day and a way was marked. So Jesus wasn't going to die here. So if they had not, what would have happened? Just no wrong answers. Just kind of use an imagination a little bit. Would the boat have sunk?
It may have, but I think knowing the timeline, they would have made it to shore. They would have survived.
In some way.
Right.
In some way. Yeah, I think so. I think what Jesus was saying, you know, of speaking about their faith and why they're afraid, I think without calming the storm, they were going to be okay. I don't know how that would have played out. Maybe it would have sunk and they'd have all walked on the water over to the shore. Maybe they would have swam the shore. Maybe someone would have picked them up. Maybe God would miraculously have just moved them over. But Jesus wasn't going to die that day, and they weren't either, because they all had roles to play. And so I think what Jesus is saying there about their faith is, like, he's calling them out for their fear of the storm when Christ was indeed with them. Mm-hmm. It's not saying that the storm would have stopped, right? He rebuked the storm, but if they'd have left Jesus sleeping, maybe it would have just stopped. Maybe the storm was almost over. We don't know. But what we know from Jesus' response is they were going to be okay. Jesus had given them roles. He called them out already to be, you know, his apostles. So that was going to happen. And similar to what Joanne said, you know, when we know that we have Jesus with us, right? And lo, I'm with you always to the end of the age. We know we have Jesus with us. It doesn't mean that the boat's not going to sink. It doesn't mean that the storm's going to stop. It does mean that Jesus is still with us. And in this life or the next, he's going to carry us on. That doesn't mean there's never a reason to be afraid, right? But the thing is, above the horizon of our fear is the knowledge of whatever happens here, I'm still with Jesus. I've heard people say, well, if you're a Christian, you should never be afraid. If I walk out in the front yard and there's, a bear loose in Camden, Delaware, in my front yard, I'm going to be afraid, and I'm going to run back in the house as fast as I can. You're not supposed to run from bears, I know. I just also know if I see a bear, I'm going to run. That's what's going to happen. And hopefully I'm either faster than the person I'm with, or I can get inside. So I'm not saying there's never a reason to be afraid, but above that fear. So people that are in countries where it's against the law to tell people about Jesus. The church is growing in leaps and bounds. Like the fastest growing church in the world is in Iran. I don't mean a single church, I mean across the nation of Iran. More Christians, more people coming to the faith than anywhere else in the world. Where they're under the greatest threat. Because they know Christ is with them. And if they get arrested, and if they get beheaded for sharing the gospel, in that instant, they will be standing completely fine in front of Jesus. And that's where I think that comes. So there is a physical thing, but there's also the eternal perspective of Christ. Going on to chapter 5, the next story is Jesus healing a man with a demon. And this is the guy that had the legion of demons in him. Many, many, many demons. And a legion was like 500 to 1,000 Roman soldiers. So if that's supposed to tell us something about the number of demons that were in him, it was something incredible. He broke chains apart. They tried to tie this guy down, and it didn't work. So then he meets Jesus, and down in verse 7, crying out with a loud voice, he said, "What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I adjure you by God, do not torment me." For he was saying to him, "Come out of the man, you unclean spirit." Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" He replied, "My name is Legion, for we are many." And he begged him earnestly not to send them out of the country. Now a great herd of pigs was feeding there on the hillside, and they begged him, saying, "Send us to the pigs, let us enter them." So he gave them permission, and the unclean spirits came out and entered the pigs, and the herd, numbering about 2,000, rushed down the steep bank into the sea and drowned in the sea. The herdsmen fled and told it in the city and the country, and the people came to see what had happened. And they came to Jesus and saw the demon-possessed man, the one who had the legion, sitting there, clothed and in his right mind, and they were afraid. And those who had seen it described to them and what had happened to the demon-possessed man and to the pigs. And they began to beg Jesus to depart from their region. As he was getting into the boat, the man who had been possessed with the demons begged him that he might be with them. And he did not permit him, but said, "Go home to your friends. Tell them how much the Lord has done for you, and how he has had mercy on you." And he went away and began to proclaim in the Decapolis how much Jesus had done for them, him, and everyone marveled. So here's another sort of scenario, right? We've got this guy who's just wild with these demons inside of him, right? He can't be controlled. Like all the guys in town can't hold him down. They put chains on him, he breaks the chains. He's got this wild strength. And the demons that are in him, giving him that wildness and that strength, they recognize Jesus right away. They know exactly who he is. Unfettered eyes the demons have. And so they see Jesus. Jesus casts them out. And then this guy, sitting there in his right mind, looking normal, when the people come and see, that scares them. So the calm sea brought about fear in the disciples, and the calm man brings about fear among the townspeople. And I find that those interesting responses. But then again, it would take a tremendous power to cause either of those things to happen. I think that's what is unsettling to people. But the the amazing thing about Christ here, I think, is his ability to, with a word, dispatch what was 500 or 1,000, or if we go by the number of pigs, 2,000 demons with a simple word. They had no ability to respond. Like the sea and like the wind, right? The waves, all that could not respond to him when he spoke. The demons, they didn't have an answer back to him. They just left. They did as they were told. Even when we look at the temptation of Christ, like in Luke 4, Satan is tempting him, but when Jesus tells him to go, Satan goes. Jesus has this control. So Jesus has control over the natural elements in the world. He has control over the supernatural beings of demons. And then the last section in chapter 5 is the story about Jairus' daughter who's dying. And Jairus comes and gets Jesus and begs Jesus to come. And so Jesus is going to go to Jairus' house. The girl's dying. So I want you to picture here someone you love in your house dying, especially a child. The urgency, right? Like when we call for help, if we think someone's dying, we call 911. We don't call the general information number at the hospital. We don't call the city of Dover and ask them if they might be able to send an ambulance. We call 911. We want somebody quickly. Jairus says Jesus comes, so Jesus is going to go. But on the way, this woman reaches out and touches Jesus in the crowd. There's this mob of a crowd, and this woman reaches out. This woman who has had an issue of blood. She suffered for many, many years. What all this meant, many things. If she had this issue, she would have been considered unclean by the Jews, which meant she couldn't be with her family. If she had children, she couldn't be with her children. She couldn't go to worship. This is ongoing. This is like she was a leper. She'd been treated like she was a leper. She would have had no contact. She braves her way in the crowd where she's not allowed to be to come to Jesus. And Jesus stops, which is great for the woman, but I think would be a little upsetting for Jairus. Like, I feel bad for her, but my daughter's dying. This woman's been sick for a long time. Maybe you can come back to her, right? It doesn't record him saying that, but you can imagine what he's thinking. And the woman reaches out and touches his garment, and then in verse 30, Jesus said, "Who touched my garment?" The disciple said to him, "You see the crowd pressing around you, and yet you say, 'Who touched me?'" And he looked around to see who had done it. But the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came in fear and trembling and fell down before him and told him the whole truth. And he said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace. Be healed of your disease." And every time I read this, just to take a little side note for a moment, Kathy and I used to attend a church in Oklahoma, and they had a visiting pastor. His name was Dale Brown, who ran a church for homeless people in Oklahoma City. And he was just a sweet-spirited man and a good preacher. And he preached on this, and he kept saying she was tired. And she was tired of being tired. I'll never forget that phrase. I mean, there was exhaustion, and then exhaustion beyond exhaustion, right? There's no end in sight. And this last, what are you going to do? Like, she's been to doctors, nothing can help, And then she comes to Jesus, and everything is made better. While he was still speaking, there came from the ruler's house someone who said, "Your daughter is dead. Why trouble the teacher any further?" So again, here's Jesus delayed in the street, and how troubling that must have been to Jairus, right? It reminds me a little bit of Jesus waiting 4 days to go to Lazarus' tomb. Like, he's got something to exhibit here. But overhearing what they said, Jesus said to the ruler of the synagogue, "Do not fear, only believe." And this is just interesting, right? Because the disciples were afraid when the storm stopped. They were afraid when the storm was going too, but they were afraid when it stopped. The townspeople were afraid when they saw the guy that was possessed by demons be healed. And then the woman who was healed came in fear and trembling before Jesus. And then he tells those who say this woman, this young girl has died, do not fear, only believe. There's something about fear in the face of, I think, this great power. And he allowed no one to follow him except Peter and James and John, the brother of James. He came to the house of the ruler of the synagogue, and Jesus saw a commotion, people weeping and wailing loudly. A child's died, right? So we get this. When he had entered, he said to them, why are you making a commotion and weeping? The child is not dead, but sleeping. And they laughed at him. But he put them all outside and took the child's father and mother and those who were with him and went into where the child was. Taking her by the hand, he said to her, Talitha Kumi, which means, little girl, I say to you, arise. And immediately the girl got up and began walking, for she was 12 years of age. I appreciate that detail from Mark. Like, had I not known this, I might have pictured an infant, you know. So he makes a point and tells she could get up and walk, but after all, she was 12, right? And they were immediately overcome with amazement, and he strictly charged them that no one should know this, and told them to give her something to eat. So while they're being, stunned by her being alive, this little girl who's been ill for days is hungry, and Jesus cares. I like this detail too. Cares enough to say, by the way, appreciate you all being amazed. She's probably hungry. She probably needs something to eat. So, boom, boom, boom. These three stories in Mark, and right in a row, four stories, three passages, four stories. We have I want to think for a moment of the disciples' perspective on all this. They'd seen some healing before. They'd not seen anyone brought back to life. So they'd seen some healing, but now they've got the storm stopped. The view of seeing those, whatever it looked like, those demons coming out of that man, whatever it sounded like, those demons speaking from his mouth, and then coming out of him, and then into the pigs, and the pigs charging down and into the sea, right? Whatever all of that looked like, it was some spectacle, right? For them to see that now they've seen this, then they see this woman, and then they see this child. And I think whatever they thought, however afraid they were, I think amazing would have been, whatever the Jewish word is for amazing, would have been the word that they would have used. And I think what Chuck Lawless is trying to do for us here is to kind of supercharge us with that. The reason he gave us these passages right in a row was to kind of infuse us with that re-amazement of who Jesus is. To give us a jump start to these 14 days that we're going to do here. Like, this is not just to be an exercise, an academic exercise. This is not just to be I'll read this and fill out the answers, move on. This is to have us want to run and hold on to Jesus' coattail. We may not need healing, but we want to be like that woman was. We want to get behind him. We want to see what Jesus is going to do next. We're probably not going to see the wind and the waves calm. We're probably not going to see anybody raised from the dead. But what amazing things might Jesus do if we're willing to look and say, yes, he is amazing. I'm going to believe that he is with me to the end of the age. So what might Jesus do if I will open myself to this, kind of reopen my eyes to what this is, And sometimes we just need that. You can have the TV on, and I like watching like sports highlight shows. If I'm not paying attention, it's not particularly amazing. But then if I stop and pay attention, and I see some guy in batting practice hit the ball 500 feet 5 times in a row, or I really pay attention to what that pass looked like, or in slow motion, how the receiver turned and went between the defenders and reached out and took the ball away. When you stop and pay attention, the things that were amazing but you weren't noticing suddenly become amazing because you see it. I love to take walks, and when I walk and I stop and I slow down, I like to take pictures. And you see a big sunset or something like that, and that captures your attention. But just the ordinary stuff, the veins on the back of a leaf, you see a squirrel, making its way from tree to tree to tree like it's a 10-foot wide, bridge, and he's walking on these little things, and this one's sagging, but he's already on the next one, so he doesn't fall. There's amazing to be had all around us. And I think Jesus will show himself to be amazing to you if you'll say, I'm going to look, I'm going to pay attention. For these next 14 days, I'm going to pay attention and see what Jesus might do that might be amazing to me, how he might amaze me. And look at this Jesus who has complete authority over the natural elements, over the supernatural elements, and on the very fiber of our being. Our movement, our blood flow, our heart stopping and starting, our breath coming and going. He has complete control over that. And then what we know when we read through the rest of the gospel, right, that he dies and lives again, he has complete authority and ability to save our souls from hell. And that's amazing. Sometimes, if we've been in church a long time, I think we, I don't want to say take for granted, but we get so used to things, like Jesus dying and saving us. Yep, that's what Christianity is about. And we kind of move on from that. I think we have to come back to that like all the time. Like all the time. There's nothing about me. We know this. There's nothing about me that deserves salvation. I have to keep coming back to that and remembering, nothing I did. Jesus saved me. Jesus took the wrath for all our sins, times however many people have ever been saved and ever will be saved. So that's what I'm asking, that you'll look for these next 6 days for that, and then we'll move from there. But see not only how Jesus has been amazing as you write that letter or those letters tomorrow, but how he might amaze you in your faithfulness to stepping out on behalf of the Great Commission this week. And you might consider writing, if you write 2 notes to people about how amazing Jesus is in your life, you might consider looking at 2 different kinds of relationships you have with somebody. And I'm not saying what to. Like, I wrote one to someone who has been a Christian longer than I've been alive, right? A very faithful person. And I wrote one to someone who I thought was spiritually perhaps a little less mature. And you might just do that just to see what 2 different kinds of responses might be for you. I'm not saying it has to be those 2, but just you might try for 2 different types of people just to see what kind of response you get. This go round, I think I'm going to personally shoot for family, and at least one an unbeliever in my family. Just see how that goes. So you can pray for that if you wish. I've been talking a lot. Do you guys have any thoughts or questions or comments about any of this? Questions about the book?
I think it's easy. Well, let me backtrack. I think that the way he approaches the very first chapter in this book is important because it's very easy for us to look beyond what we read. If it's not right in our face and we can't physically see that dead person being raised,
right,
we're not amazed by that story. Or if we can't see the storm being stopped, it's hard to be amazed by that. And I think that it's important in this storyline to think of just how being in Jesus' presence changes who we are in modern day. The way we view people, the way we speak, just our sheer transformation from who we used to be prior to being Christian to who we are now. I know personally, I am the same body, but two different people. I mean, if you would have known me 20 years ago, I'm a completely different person today because of Jesus. And just knowing that personal amazement in my transformation. One of the comments that was left on the Facebook page when we were talking about fear, it says, "Fear is a battle. Without faith, we lose the battle and allow fear to always win. How we battle fear is the key."
Good word. It's a good word. And how we battle that fear is by not facing it on our own, remembering the presence of Christ. And here's the thing about whether it's battling fear or whether it's being amazed by Jesus, Jesus is no less amazing today than he ever was. Right. Like if we could see Jesus on his throne now, the way Isaiah saw him and was stunned to the point of he was disintegrating. That's how he felt he was coming apart. And Jesus was just sitting there, right? Sitting on the throne. He wasn't stopping storms. He wasn't raising anybody. He wasn't healing anybody. The presence of Christ is amazing beyond any words we have to describe or our understanding. The deal is, we look at the world like Peter did after he took those first few steps on the water. The world's bigger, right? Because we don't see Jesus. And yet, God has given us the Holy Spirit. He's given us ability. He's given us his word. There must be a way for us to be amazed by Jesus like Isaiah was, let alone like these guys were. And so I think what we have to do is pray that God would reveal to us to move the stuff out of the way that's in the way, right? The run-of-the-mill stuff that takes up our everyday life, our everyday eyes, the things we see every day. Ask God to help us with that. Ask God to amaze us, and not necessarily by calming storms or raising people, but by who he is. Praising him for who he is and seeing him for who he is. And again, the shortness of amazement doesn't come from Jesus being less amazing. It comes from our view, right? The stuff in front of our eyes. We know that the people who saw some of this happen walked away unamazed, right? When we look at Lazarus being raised from the dead, and the guys huddled over in a corner and said, "We got to kill this guy, right? We got to get rid of him. He's going to be trouble." So, we know that seeing may cause amazement and it may not, but Christ is amazing, and part of that is by spending time in prayer. I think of praising God for who He is. I think that opens up some of that pathway for us to have the Spirit settle into us. It's like love of another person, love of a spouse, love of a parent and child. The way you love. It's not a formula. It's not a chemical formula. It's not something they can just, all right, you write this down and this will cause it. But we know it's real, right? We know it's real. We know affection we have for people, even people we like. There's something different between people you like and people you don't like that changes something in you. I think Christ will give us that if we seek it and seek to be amazed by Him. So, what I would encourage everyone to do is to start your day off with this, if that's a possibility for you. Start your day off with again, most of the passages won't be this long, but to including the Bible reading, this is, without the writing the letter, which is a separate thing, but just going through this part is, it's under 10 minutes. And then I would schedule a time to do the other thing. So you might want to say, I don't want to do that right now. I want to get my thoughts together. I want to think about that for the rest of the day. But through the day tomorrow, try to write that letter. And I'm just going to be honest with you. Each time I've done this, I've sometimes, on the third day, done the second and third day's activities. I think it just happens. I want to give yourself permission that if you miss day 3, don't quit. Just do what you need to do. Stay a day behind. There's going to be no penalty if you come in next week and you missed a day. But I would encourage you to not leave one behind, not leave one undone ever. To catch back up on it, because I think doing these steps in the order he's laid them out for us will be extraordinarily useful for you. And with that, that's really what I have. I didn't know how long it would take to go through this, but are there any final thoughts or comments or just questions or anything?
I was thinking about relationships and how they work, and just one thing I've learned is the spending time, because I think, like Ed was saying, when we hear the stories and we're like, wow, I remember thinking, oh, I wish I could feel that way, or I wish I could, and God reveals himself to us in his time and as he chooses, and not all at once. And I think that, but there's something, and you said before, required on our part to receive it. And I just find that more and more, spending time and really, like you said, thinking about the stories, thinking about this really happened, he was on a book, meditating on his word, getting to know who he is. Because as I was reading the first story, I was like, well, he wasn't afraid. And the more time you spend and just thinking about it, I think sometimes when I remember speaking for myself, I would read a story and be like, I get that, well, that's cool, but I can't relate to that.
Right.
I don't know what that was like, but God has shown me how I may not have been on a boat but I've certainly experienced his peace and knew that it wasn't coming from me. And in situations that I wanted to be afraid, or that was my instinct, but this just how he wasn't afraid and how he was able to sleep. He knew exactly what was going to happen, and he wasn't afraid at all. And so that just tells me more about him. Like every time I spend time with him, I learn more about him. That's who we believe in. He is in control. He is not afraid. He knows exactly everything. Like reading these stories, that helps us to know who this Jesus is, and that we can trust in him.
And I do think it's useful to spend time really looking at the stories here, and you know what a storm looks like. So when I see a movie of people out on some, on a ship at sea in a storm like that, I don't like those. If it's on land, I can always get someplace. But when you're out where there's 2 miles of water underneath you, that always kind of, that movie, The Perfect Storm, anything like that, those always freak me out a little bit, because I'm like, where do you go? There's not another place to go. You're done. And so, I find that one easy kind of to step into. But all those, the woman trying to reach out and touch Jesus, what that must have taken for her. She wasn't allowed to be in the crowd, right? She wasn't allowed. She was supposed to be on the other side of the street. So the courage mingled with the fear, right? Because sometimes those things, what they say, bravery is not the lack of fear. Bravery is acting when you're afraid. I think that our courage is acting when you're actually afraid of that. So I think it is helpful to go through those. And then you might find, yeah, there are situations in my life that these details aren't the same, but really the oomph of the story is similar to something I've seen or something I've experienced. Yeah.
Well, I can tell you, I've been in the middle of the ocean on a boat in the middle of a storm. Obviously, my boat was a little bit bigger than theirs, but when you're on a 500-foot long vessel that's 200 feet above the ocean, and you got 50-foot waves crashing halfway over the bow of the boat, that is a very unsettling situation to be in.
And that's when you think and say, can steel really float?
Yeah, really. But, I mean, it's just that whole, I couldn't imagine being in a storm like that in a boat like they were in.
Sure. So that's a similar thing. Like, you know, I saw airplanes, C-5s take off every day and just got used to it. And then one day we had a deep sea rescue vehicle on one, which was a submarine that the C-5 was carrying, and 300,000 pounds of fuel. That's 150 tons of fuel. And it took the whole runway for it to take off. And everybody, you know, the crustiest old crew chiefs had been out there for years. Everybody was standing out there watching, and sort of when it got airborne, right? You know, it was like, wow, it really can fly, you know? And sometimes it takes that something and to re-energize that amazement. So.
Well, I think the details are, you guys, you know, you have personal details, but the Bible has details, and they're there for a reason. So if you read a passage and you're not amazed initially, maybe consider rereading it and looking into the details. I think the perspective of the young girl being offered something to eat is really important detail, right? To actually how miraculous him raising her up. We no longer live, we have an entire society now that no longer has people that die at home in bed. But for someone to be that ill, and to, first of all, standing would be miraculous.
Right.
Secondly, when you're that ill, you don't want to eat.
Right.
And so to be ready to take food is a sign of being healed.
Yeah, she
right?
went just a little better.
Yeah, like a little bit, right? Yeah,
That's a good point.
Yeah, so
That's a
I
good
mean,
point.
If you're not amazed initially at these verses as we read them, perhaps think through each detail as they exist. Say like, well, why was that there? It's important for a reason. It's in there for something.
Right, right. And with the reason I love Mark so much is because Mark gets to those pretty quickly.
Right.
Right. The other stuff in the other Gospels are important. The deep theology and doctrine that's very important for other things, but for just getting kind of, you know, poked. Hey, wake up, watch this. Mark's really good for that. So.
And it shouldn't have been so hard on the disciples because they had been there with him. Because I think that story also shows us our need and our inability to do it in ourselves. You know,
Right.
That they see then they're going to be afraid. You know, we need because we're not capable of facing situations like that or solving them on our own.
Right, right. Things we wouldn't even think of trying. Yeah. Well, let me close this in prayer. Lord God, I do thank you for the amazing person of Christ who was amazing, the things he did in this world. But God, I ask for each of us that you would give us eyes to see how amazing he is now. More amazing. As he is at your right hand, as he, in this moment, is praying for us. That's amazing. Yeah, he's praying for us as we move forward in this book. Jesus, God the Son, right now, interceding on our behalf with the Father. Lord, help us to be amazed by that. Lord, help us to make this a priority to look in your word, to look in this book, to take the steps, to trust that you will show us something that we need to see and make us into something we need to be made into. Lord, bless each person here. Take them safely home. Be with them until we meet again. In In Jesus' name, amen. Amen. Thank you, all y'all, for
Thank you.
coming.
All y'all.
And all y'all who are watching, thank you.
So,